Hey everyone, you're watching DeFi Talks with DeFi Dad. Hey, it is Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022. Thanks for joining us. This is going to be a very unique episode. I'm honored here to be able to speak today with Matt West, who is a longtime member of the DeFi community, but more recently, he's announced his candidacy to run for a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. He'd be representing the 6th District in Oregon. So just a really exciting turn of events. And I learned about this only recently through ETH Denver. I think Leighton Cusack from PoolTogether was kind of sharing this with lots of folks, both on Twitter and at the event. And so, yeah, Matt, just thanks for joining me. We're super excited to learn more about your platform and why you're running.
Absolutely. It's my great pleasure to be here. I've been a fan of this show for quite some time. So yeah, this is a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Yeah. And per usual, we hopped on and then I used the last 30 minutes to just selfishly ask Matt all the questions that I wanted to ask him. No, it is so cool to see someone who so deeply understands and represents our interests, not only just in crypto, but you're very involved across DeFi and Web3 protocols. And, you're a valued member of the Ethereum community. And I'm not sure if you're involved in any other chains, but it's something I didn't foresee happening for many years. So I'm thinking we can get to know a little bit more about your background. One of the things I want to call out ahead of time is Matt has been a Yearn Finance strategist. So he's written strategies before. I think he's got a few more in the works that hopefully will get published. And so if you're not familiar with Yearn, we'll talk a bit about that. And then I really want to get your perspective about, how are you going to sort of bridge the divide between the legacy class of those in the U.S. government with the newcomers, hopefully like yourself, who can, shed light on how does decentralized finance or DeFi actually work? What sorts of risks are there? And I think hopefully how can it ultimately empower the average person to permissionlessly be able to plug into these powerful money softwares? So Matt, do you want to share a little bit more about your education, your background,
Sure.
how you got into Intel and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background in crypto actually started in 2009. I did some very early mining on Bitcoin for a couple of days while I was in undergrad. But at that time I was living in Tucson in an under air conditioned apartment. It was the middle of summer. So having my computer run full stop for 3-4 days or to a week or something like that was very uncomfortable. And at the time, I was talking to a friend of mine, I have all these, Bitcoins, cool. How much is that worth? Less than a penny. So why are you doing this? Good question. But I got back involved in 2013 when I was in grad school at the University of Texas at Austin. I was working on my PhD for renewable energy technologies, fuel cells, batteries, solar panels. And I bought myself an ASIC miner from Butterfly Labs. And I actually got one of the very few Butterfly Labs ASICs that were sent out to human beings. So I had that for a while. And I mined with that until it was no longer profitable. And I remember I sold my first Bitcoin that I mined to Coinbase, I think for $13 to $15. I was mining a few Bitcoins a day at that point using various mining pools. I could go back through my Coinbase history log and find exactly what my first transaction was. But I then basically, once that miner was no longer profitable, I was just an enthusiast, a user of the space, advocate for it. But I graduated, moved out to Oregon to work at Intel, where I was at their R&D facility helping to pathfind the manufacturing process for their future generations of microchips. I've been there for the last 7 years. And throughout that entire time, I was still using and investing in crypto, but it was 2020 during the pandemic that everyone was stuck at home learning how to make sourdough or knit or whatever. I taught myself programming, and I became a programmer in Solidity, and I started messing around. I actually hadn't done any coding since my first year of undergrad, so it was more years than I'd like to count at that point. But I was posting on Yearn's forums back at the beginning of DeFi summer about various strategies and ideas. And a member of the community reached out to me and asked if I wanted to team up with them and enter the ETH Online hackathon, which Yearn was a sponsor of. And I said, sure. And to be fair, he did more of the programming than I did because he was been programming for his professional life and I was just learning. But we won. We won Yearn's first place. And since then, we've been strategists with Yearn. And so I started writing various strategies, editing others. My main strategy that is public knowledge was PoolTogether. So my strategies deposited funds from Yearn's vaults to PoolTogether to farm the pool tokens, but also, provide liquidity to PoolTogether to bump up their prize value. Wow. And that was basically how I got involved in the entire system. And I've been programming ever since. I've got 2 more strategies in review right now that I really should get back to at some point, but I'm not campaigning. But yeah, that's my long and winding history.
Man, so I didn't realize that you learned Solidity during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Wow. What great timing, because having learned that too, Yearn launched technically in the spring 2020, but really got going by the summer and the fall. Yeah. So man, that is that's wild. And this sort of speaks to part of the reason I was excited to talk to you is your you represent you're a very classic profile of folks in our community, very curious, kind of a self-starter, self-learner. Obviously you work at Intel now, so you've got a long history kind of working in a more technical space, but this is sort of your experience in DeFi and crypto clearly is adjacent to even what's been your full-time career. And that's what I want to see running for Congress is I want to see people who know how to solve really hard problems, not someone who seeks to be simply a professional sort of representative of us and represent us in Congress. I want to ask you more about how you think about incentives in the world of DeFi, because as with all the different protocols you've been involved in, which I'd love to hear more about, how do you think to apply that to the job of being in the U.S. Congress?
That's a really great question. I don't actually think I've been asked that one specifically before, so thank you for bringing up something new. When we're talking about incentives in the DeFi system, there are a few different mechanisms that go down. But what I think we've found over the last couple of years is that the best systems are mutually beneficial to the depositor and to the software developer. So when we're talking about, say, Yearn, people deposit their value to Yearn, and in return, they get a return on investment. But Yearn also gets some of that return on investment as their own profit. When you look at synthetics, it's the same thing. You stake your SNX token, you provide liquidity to their system so people can mint SUSD and then make that to be other sorts of synthetic valuations. But what you're doing is you're underpacking the entire collateral of the ecosystem. Same thing with Aave, for example. You deposit funds so that you can loan it out. You get a return on investment. But if you also want to, you can stake in their security platform section and continue to provide a backstop for the program. So when we're talking about DeFi, those are always the systems that I find to be the most valuable and sustainable, are the ones where there's a clear incentive for the depositor and a clear incentive for the protocol itself, and that they kind of work together. They're not at odds with each other. And when we're talking about government policies, it's really important to see how various incentives play out, both in actuality as opposed to in theory, and dealing with the human psychology of that as well. When we're talking about people, for example, right now the United States really loves to build tanks for no good reason whatsoever, and then we park them in a desert somewhere. And the main reason for that is that we're spending that money as a jobs program. So some representative and senator in some state or whatever district has an incentive to bring money and funds to their state. And in turn, we build tanks that the military doesn't even want, so we just shove them into a corner. That's clearly an area of incentive for the district that does not match the incentive of, the rest of the nation, or in this case, that'd be analogous to like the protocol. So we need to work towards finding those mutually beneficial and harmonious incentives.
Yeah, and I think one of the perks of having worked in this space is you see an accelerated sort of timeline in terms of the effects of your decisions. So, obviously in our world, whether it's launching a new protocol like Yearn, launching a token, voting on proposals in a DAO, the same way that you would vote in Congress, the difference is we see these changes often implemented very quickly. And then because people are able to vote for their approval, I would say, of those decisions by either, let's say, buying or selling a token, you quickly learn whether or not you've made the right decision. So you become very incentivized to make the right decision. And that's, I think there's huge opportunity there. I'd love to ask you more about this. Huge opportunity for more uses of blockchain, whether it's decentralized finance or simply using it to allow us to have more instantly audible tracking of, supply chains, where money is being used when we spend it through, congressional initiatives. I mean, it's really frightening if for anyone who's ever watched a news report documentary on like all of the waste that happens. Whereas I would argue in DeFi, everything is instantly auditable on chain. Nothing can be hidden if it's on chain and it's truly DeFi. And I feel like those are some of the lessons that I think most in Congress would get behind, but they kind of need, a new fresh face like you to be helping them, come up to speed. It makes a big difference when someone sitting across the aisle from you can speak to you and have coffee and have a lunch and so on versus, some of these people represent millions of folks. And so it's very difficult for them to, of course, keep track of so many different issues.
Absolutely. I think one of the last bipartisan areas of the United States government right now is actually the blockchain caucus in Congress. It's wild for me to see a representative who is a Republican propose a bill, have a Democrat co-sponsor it and sign on to it, and then we're actually work together. Right now, we're so polarized in general across this country that almost no other instance does that actually take place. I think there's a real value in making sure that there is bipartisanship when it comes to blockchain, Web3, crypto, whatever you want to call it, simply because right now, what we like to talk about, say Amazon, for example, we'll talk about Amazon and how to regulate a big company like that. We'll talk about how best to tax a big company like that. But what we don't ask is, should we ban e-commerce? And right now, when we're talking about blockchain, that's the kind of conversation we're having is, are we going to ban blockchain? And in those sorts of issues, that's because blockchain, Web3, does not have supporters on both sides of the aisle. So it's not an institution that's protected. That's what we need is advocates on both sides. So if there's an election, say one way or the other, the existence of blockchain is not up for question anymore. It's taken for granted as an institution. But what will change is, what's the tax structure on sales, that sort of thing. The traditional sort of stuff that Democrats and Republicans like to argue over, that's where I really want to see blockchain move towards, because that's clearly the instance where it should be as a accepted technology and tool that has real value, that provides, real work to real people.
So I want to run through a number of issues that are like near and dear to us and not knowing whether or not you've have proposals or ideas in mind for it. But I guess, how do you think about crypto taxes? Is any thoughts there in terms of where there could be improvements or what sort of work can be done with the IRS? Yeah.
Yes. Whenever I take Ether and turn it into wrapped Ether, that should not be a taxable event, but it is. That is a sale of Ether and a purchase of wrapped Ether. So if you had an Ether token that went from $1,000 to $2,000, and then you wrap it so you can use it in an ERC20 contract somewhere for like DeFi applications. Now you have to pay taxes on that $2,000 of gain, even though in reality, you're just taking one token in one format and like just one hand feeds the other. And in the middle now, there's a taxable event. That is a clear instance of how the system is not really making sense at the moment. If you were to transact Tether for a DAI, something of that nature in stablecoins, that also is a taxable event, even though you are doing one-to-one, but you still have to report it to the IRS as a sale and purchase of one thing for another. So there's a real huge implication here when it comes to that. When you deposit to a Yearn vault and then you withdraw, that's considered a purchase of a share of a Yearn vault and then a sale of a share of a Yearn vault in return. That is a clear, problem. What we need to move towards is like when you deposit something to Aave and you withdraw it later, what we currently have is you pay taxes on the interest that you get. That's the model we should be working towards when it comes to these institutions. But since it's so new and since we have no regulatory infrastructure currently in place, they're going with the simplest thing, which is purchasing and selling and then paying short-term versus long-term gains. That's the only model that we currently have that we can apply. So that's what the regulators are forcing the IRS to do, is use that model. So when we get more people in Congress who actually understand these nuances, we'll move towards a system that makes more sense than the one that we currently have. And that's why I think we need more blockchain-friendly people helping to make the rules.
Makes sense. Yeah. That's actually a great example that I've. It's the simplest example of like how backwards the system is. I mean, there's also I've had concerns about staked ETH as well. Like
Yes.
if you hold a form of staked ETH, technically you're selling one token for another.
Yep.
Because of the way they define it. There's like a misunderstanding that like you are actually like depositing your token into a contract, almost I would say like a savings account, but it's difficult to understand. How about how do you think about the way that protocols today are launching offshores outside of the United States? So teams are building offshores, and they will launch these new, very innovative protocols, many of which, like there's countless applications and projects that have launched over the last year that have market caps worth many billions each. Most of those launches, I would argue, have had to gate U.S. investors.
Yeah.
How do you begin to think about that? Like, what is the gap or the hiccup there that like needs to be resolved so that I guess like so that it becomes more friendly for DeFi builders to come on shores to the US, or to basically not have to worry. My concern has always been everything that gets built that has a token, every builder in the world, whether that token has clear utility or not, is scared out of their mind of it being a security. I guess like, how do you think about that, kind of having worked, closely within like a DeFi protocol? And I know like having been across lots of other projects as like a token holder.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very big question. I could tackle that from like numerous different angles, but I think the simplest one is that we need to make a regulatory infrastructure that makes sense for these things. Like we said, right now, we've given the regulators a mandate, which is to regulate. And now that we've become a $2 to $3 trillion industry, they're suddenly realizing that they have to legally try to regulate this industry in some manner because they have a legal responsibility to do so. But we've not given them any clear guidelines on how to do that. So what they're doing is they're coming to it like after the fact and saying, oh, well, you built something that turns out it was illegal operating for 5 years. You thought you were doing it, all legally, you were operating in good faith, but you were actually breaking the law. So we're going to fine you $100 million, like in the case of BlockFi. What we need is proactive legislation that clearly lays out what the rules are, because in that instance, you get to define what's an asset like Bitcoin, what's a use token like Ethereum, what's a stable coin like DAI or USDC in this case, and what's, a voting right, which maybe that could be labeled a security. But it's very clear that Bitcoin, Ether, DAI are not securities. Like Unitoken, maybe, but that's the sort of way that we need to move towards getting regulations in space that make sense and understand that these tokens are not inherently identical. So another aspect is that when we're like building this, we need to ensure that we have a safe harbor for these new protocols. There's something new being developed like every month. You'll see something like, you know, 1 year was DeFi summer, 1 year is NFT summer. Now we're in like the year of the DAO. Every year, every month, there's some new protocol or some new thing that comes out in this space that we haven't thought about before. And so trying to apply like, well, is this a security ahead of time can really like freeze up projects. And what we've seen are projects that attempt to work proactively with the regulators end up on ice for like a year or two before they can even build and move forward. Whereas other projects who build and then in good faith get fined later had 2 years of growth, in which case, like maybe that fine is just considered doing a cost of business. That's a pretty bad framework to have. So a safe harbor would allow new protocols for like a period of 3 to 5 years build in relatively good faith with very light touch from regulators, just to make sure that what they're building is like not clearly illegal, not clearly a rug pull sort of situation. And then after that time frame is over, the regulators come back and go, okay, is this token a asset token? Is it a utility token? Is it a stable coin? Is it a voting share? Is this protocol centralized or sufficiently decentralized? And what are the metrics for those? And when you have that sort of situation, if it is a truly decentralized protocol and network, that has one regulatory framework. If it's a centralized protocol with most of the voting assets being held by the board or VCs or, you know, the founder, that would be looking more like a traditional corporation sort of situation. So I think that's why we really need a safe harbor, is because they can build in relative peace to make these new ideas and these new innovative technologies, and then have a pathway after the fact to determine what it actually shaped up to be. Because like, let's be clear, the narrative around Bitcoin started off as super easy to transact money from one person to another, backed by a blockchain, so there won't be any sort of like changes, but it'll be super cheap to move money from one person to another. You can use it to do daily purchases. And then during 2017, when transaction fees were incredibly high, the narrative changed to it's actually a store of wealth and a store of value. High transaction fees are actually good in this case. So it's very possible for the narrative around a network or a protocol to shift within a few years. And that's why after it's grown and actually has some like, you know, meat on the bone, that's when we can apply the regulatory framework, because now we've seen what it is, not what we wanted it to be when we first started building.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to think. I think it was back in October, the SEC approved 3 Bitcoin ETFs. Who would have ever believed that would have happened many years ago? So, you know, I do appreciate like some viewpoints there have evolved over time, but I think you know, it's one of the things I'm hoping that more of Congress, more of the U.S. government, more of those working as regulators come to understand is this is a much larger wealth creation event than even the spawn of the internet. Absolutely. And you know, whether actually, so if you take that at face value first, it's frightening to think of like scaring people away from the United States builders. You know, Absolutely. You're just going to lose so much economic activity. Now, then add on top of that, you've got actually major brands now, like you've got Adidas and Nike. GameStop was one this year. You've got iconic brands dogpiling now into using NFTs.
Right.
And then you've got all sorts of other like, you know, world-renowned brands that are making use of tokens. And so like the demand is there. I think that like what DeFi's built with nearly 250 billion in assets that are, you know, basically its own sort of decentralized economy. Like how much more proof do you need to realize we really should be considering how can we foster innovation versus scaring it away without this sort of, you know, like I love your idea for a safe harbor, because right now, if you start a project in the US and you are simply investigated by the SEC, not, guilty of anything,
Right.
but you endure an investigation. That is going to be very expensive, and it's something that sticks with you. I mean, the news gets out, oh, so-and-so is being investigated. And that's that can be the death of a project versus what you pointed out. There's other projects that have flourished over the last several years, and they could sustain an investigation with the SEC now, even if, no harm comes from it.
Right.
What about, there's a few other things you mentioned there. I want to talk maybe about stable coins.
Sure.
How do you frame the opportunity of stable coins? Because I've heard a number of high profile names in Congress say that stable coins are a threat to the US dollar. There's that whole argument, which, by the way, makes no sense to me because it's basically reinforcing a dependency on the US dollar.
Yeah.
All these stable coins.
Absolutely.
The other one is, and this was Senator Elizabeth Warren said something to the effect of, and I'm in the state of Massachusetts, so I have to stay up to date with the things she says about DeFi. She said something to the effect of, that DeFi is like one of the shadiest parts of crypto.
Oh, yeah.
And she was sort of referring
right here. So
she was going down the path of stable coins. Her concern, which here's where I can understand and empathize with what her concern is, even though it's a misinformed take, is she's worried about stable coins failing and having lots of retail investors left holding the bill. And then where I want to let you speak more to this, I think the misinformation there is not realizing there's been 7 billion in hacks just in the past year for DeFi. I think it's 7 billion. I think that's what the Defiant reported. We're used to already sustaining exploits. And that's why we have things like DeFi insurance, or we have folks who simply just own accountability for high risk, high reward.
Right.
So anyways, the TLDR on this is, how do you begin to educate Congress on the opportunity with stable coins? What do you think is like a low hanging sort of opportunity for us to use stable coins? Anyways.
Absolutely. I think this is a key example of where a lot of misinformation currently exists in Congress. I forget the member of Congress who was talking about 3 different stable coins during a hearing, the HFSC hearing, where they said, Tether, USDC, and Magic Internet Money, which, sure, that's a pretty glib name, but Magic Internet Money works almost exactly to DAI, so let's use DAI instead, because one is Tether, which is, an offshore company, which is a little bit cloudy. We don't see access to their books. So they may be printing money that they don't have. It looks like they operate more as a fractional reserve. That's one thing. The other one is USDC, which is heavily regulated, already works hand in hand with the United States government, and is recognized by the government as being legal tender. So that's a second one. The third one is essentially a over-collateralized loan. So these are 3 different stable coins with 3 different methods of producing that one-to-one value to the US dollar, but they're wildly different in implementation. So you can't just talk about DAI as though it's the exact same thing as Tether. They are fundamentally different. Their use case in the end is the same, but you have to regulate them differently. So if you want to talk about regulating stablecoins, we can talk about the over-collateralized loan, we can talk about this, but really that sort of fractional reserve offshore thing is where I think more of that insight has to look. I think, stable coins with USDC in particular are already much of a still solved problem. There is no threat of a run on the banks with USDC because it's backed 1-to-1. There is no threat of a liquidation event in case of DAI because it's over collateralized. So unless you have a drop of more than 50% in 5 minutes, you're not going to have a run on the bank situation. So it's really a matter of educating my future colleagues behind closed doors about these nuances, because the fact is a lot of them truly don't understand that nuance, and a lot of people are afraid of what they don't understand. This is a huge opportunity to get one of their own, an actual colleague who works with them on numerous other things like healthcare, like, affordability, childcare credits, or all those things that Democrats love to talk about. And then when I say, also, by the way, here's why I think you're wrong about this one particular thing, that really drives home a lot more, because like they've been working with me, they know me, they start to trust me. And then my weight of like, I agree with you. There's some regulations that need to happen, but I think you're coming at it the wrong way. That's where I think that carries a lot of weight, because, I'll be out to dinner with them or at a drink at a bar, and then we'll have that conversation and I get to explain to them these differences. That really will start to break down a lot of these walls. And the truth of the matter is, stable coins denominated to the US dollar are a huge, huge opportunity for the United States to expand the strength of the dollar internationally. The dollar is already considered by most nations to be the reserve currency of the world due to the petrodollar status. And in Europe, we already have euro dollars, which are essentially the pegged valuation to the dollar, which is not actually backed by much of anything. So this is already like exists in the real world, the euro dollar and the petrodollar, which are very analogous to like Tether, USDC, and DAI. So having every asset across the world denominated in dollars and the local, currency, strengthens the dollar in a very real way. And if we encourage the adoption of platforms like USDC, that gives the United States a huge strength across the entire crypto ecosystem, because it is regulated. They have already found instances where like a hack happened, the US government asked them like, this is a theft, and they locked down and froze those accounts. There are instances of this happening in the past. Circle works with the US government extensively. Everyone across the ecosystem trusts USDC implicitly. They do know that there is the risk of it being frozen, so it's not truly a decentralized, permissionless currency. But the point is, we can, actually encourage the adoption of this thing. We can send out real dollars across the world in a way that strengthens our currency beyond what the petrodollar system ever had, especially as we transition to a new economy that is not entirely focused on oil and oil products. So this is really a huge potential game changer as we move towards a green economy.
I want to just cover one last question, because I think what you're talking about in terms of reinforcing a dependency on USD pegged stable coins, like how that's an opportunity for the US, which we clearly agree on. I can't even begin to understand why anyone wants to fight it. It's like it's like a mass distribution of the dollar. It goes from like all of the work that was put in place, all of the decades of like influence and both the good and the bad things that the US government has done to get the dollar out there. This is expedited delivery of the US dollar by using pegged stable coins. I mean, and we know that because we're familiar with friends or contacts that are in parts of the world like Nigeria or Argentina who have become big adopters of stable coins. And it's there's stories about like it's really a life raft compared to some really like high inflation foreign currencies. How do you begin to think about the I hate using the word metaverse because it's become such like a stupid buzzword because of Facebook or Meta bastardizing like the meaning of it. But if we think about the early 2000s, the 90s is the spawn of the internet, and now you're very connected to anyone across the world who has an internet connection. You can email suddenly, so you can bypass like the old snail mail. And then, of course, we move from like that Web 1, where I want to say email is one of the few early applications. Most of the internet is basically like a museum. You can go in and look at like a page. Then we move to the Web 2, and we have blogs and we have social media and all that fun stuff where you can actually interact. And now we're at Web 3, where you actually own it, where you can like own the network, own Ethereum that stuff's being built on. How do you begin to think about the opportunity with the metaverse for the US government? Like, because I just can't imagine missing again, this like enormous wealth creation event where you're going to have digital universities and you're going to have, digital work settings. And I mean, just like what the internet was in terms of a website to a traditional business, how that became a standard. Everyone would eventually have a website. I'm feeling like that's where we're headed with the metaverse. So anyways, how do you think about that opportunity?
I mean, really, I think what one thing most people in the United States can agree on, most people around the world, is that we do not want a metaverse built by Facebook, built by Apple. We don't want a corporate recreation and like a walled garden experience where we have to ask permission to do literally anything. And this is a huge, huge opportunity for the US government. Like you've mentioned, this is happening whether we want it to happen here or not. We can't shut down Ethereum. We can't ban Bitcoin. We can only turn it underground or offshore it. And eventually, as these protocols continue to gain strength, the United States will come back to it later. But at that point, we'll have lost out on that growth. We'll have lost out on the technological innovation happening there, the skills associated from learning, from interacting with the growing protocol. And lastly, we'll have lost out on the opportunity to help shape this network to fit our own values more so. Like, we don't want a metaverse that is owned and controlled by a singular entity. We want a metaverse, should we even want one at all, we can have that discussion for other people, to actually be community owned, to be free, open, secure, not draconian authoritarian oversight. You can do that whether we're talking about a foreign government or we're talking about a national, international conglomerate company. We want something where peer-to-peer transactions are truly viable. So this is exactly why we need one of our own in Congress to help educate. Like, this is a true revolution in terms of the ideas of what the internet are. Like, there's so many value propositions that Web3 blockchain can bring to individual users, helping to bank the unbanked. 60% of people in the United States who don't have access to a bank account do have a smartphone. That's a huge win. You can own your own content.
I did not. That's a crazy stat. Whoa.
I'm a huge proponent for incorporating postal banking, but like an immediate win of 60% of the population who are underbanked have access to a smartphone. Like, that really breaks down so many barriers so quickly. We have the opportunity to own what you produce on the internet thanks to blockchain. The value that you create for these networks, you get to share in. You get the more democratization of the internet. You get to help vote on these protocols. So a big one is with Web3, every single transaction that happens with your account has to be approved and signed by you. Fundamentally, that is a core requirement of Web3 design. Web2, your interactions on the networks are scraped and harvested by main monolithic companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook. They capture your data and sell it, and you have very little rights regarding what they can and can't interact with, take from you. They just do it. With Web3, you will have to approve them gathering that data on you. Carte blanche. So it is people talk about the GDPR that they've done in Europe as an opt-in system, or an opt-out rather. And that's a advancement forward of securing intellectual IP and privacy rights. But Web3 is even one step beyond that. That's an opt-in system. You don't have to say provide opportunities for people to say, no, don't track me. Instead, you have to give them, say, yes, you can track me. Here you go. That's a huge fundamental difference. And that's why, once again, we need someone on the inside of the United States government who understands this, who can lobby for this behind closed doors in a way that lobbyists traditionally can't, who can help to educate their colleagues in a way that they don't have to worry about asking a question in front of a camera that might make them look weird. This is a key opportunity to get an advocate, one of our own, inside government to help shape the narrative and prevent bills like the 6050I from being introduced on the floor before it's even introduced. If I were in office, I could have explained to people, look, you can't have every node maintainer be a money transmitter. That fundamentally does not work. You're trying to ban unicorns from existing. Why are you doing that? I know what you're trying to do, but the way that you've written it, nonsense. So yeah, Absolutely.
I think it's really important that like this point you've been making about having like one of our own there. Like as much as I appreciate like the Coin Center's been an incredible advocate for the crypto industry and especially DeFi in recent years, but yeah, it makes a difference having an actual representative in the House, and I'm hoping more will run for the House and the Senate in the future from the community. But like I think you helped also break the mold of, you know, I do understand like there's definitely a profile that people envision in the crypto community.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, hey, a lot of us are, you know, the same sort of, you know, profile that you would expect in Congress, you know, folks who just like want to do good work, like create like a better country, create more economic opportunity for others, look out for the best interests of everyone, but especially the most vulnerable, you know, people who historically may have been taken advantage of. So Matt, I want to end with this thing because I really just pummeled you with a bunch of DeFi crypto questions. Do you want to just quickly summarize like some of the other parts of your platform? Like I know like one of the things like as I contribute to some environmental activist groups, like just supporting like public lands and hiking and so on where I live. So I really love that you have a clear stance around climate change. But yeah, anything else there that that is a big part of your platform?
I mean, you really hit on it. The biggest part of my platform right now is fighting climate change. I have my PhD in renewable energy sources because I specifically wanted to help fight against climate change when I was in academia. I went to go work for Intel for 7 years, but now I've seen the impact that climate change has had on my home. In Oregon, we've had wildfires year after year, and they've only been getting worse. I got COVID near the beginning of the pandemic, and in 2020, the wildfires were so bad and so close to my home that when I walked my dog, I had to wear a painter's respirator because otherwise breathing hurt too much. I had to wear a gas mask essentially to go walking my dog. I was a half mile from the get ready to evacuate border during that wildfire season.
Wow.
We're looking at, you know, a heat dome in Oregon, in my home, which now Portland, Oregon's all-time high temperature is 1 degree less than Las Vegas's all-time high temperature. I have an air conditioner, but my apartment was still 94 degrees because my air conditioner was not built for that level of heat. Our bridges were literally melting because our infrastructure is not built for that level of heat. Beyond like all those things, like the perfect example of this, the horrible summer that we had in the Pacific Northwest last year was the hottest place in Canada now was 123 degrees Fahrenheit. That was a small town in like the Vancouver area, just within the Pacific Northwest. But a month later, that town burned down. So now the record of all-time high temperature in Canada is a town that no longer exists. That is a perfect example of how bad this last summer was. And whether I'm going to talk to my neighbors in suburban areas or going into the actual downtown to talk to people there, or even out in the rural areas, like it's so acute in my district that everyone feels it. This is the top concern of everyone in my district, whether you're rural, more conservative, or whether you're urban and more progressive and liberal. We share this common concern.
Yeah.
So that is my absolute number one issue. Number two is fighting against all this damn misinformation that's out there. Whether we're talking about misinformation when it comes to blockchain and crypto, or vaccines and like microchips being in the vaccines, for example, whether or not climate change really exists. There's so much misinformation out there right now that I really felt like someone with a scientific background could really, really help to like break down those walls and just have a counter voice to this constant narrative from a lot of our elected officials or people in power, just straight up lying to people about what's true and what isn't.
It is wild, like once, especially if you come from any sort of physical sciences background. So like funny, me and Matt were talking about, I studied chemistry and I did not finish. I ended up dropping out of a chemistry PhD program. But like, my God, like if you understood what it takes to get something published in a chemistry journal or whatever, physics, math, whatever, it's so difficult because you're actually fighting all of the incumbent researchers who are basically working their butts off to prove that you're wrong. So like it's not a like kumbaya, like we all can do this together vibe. It's people fighting for research grants and fervently fighting to disprove something unless there's absolutely enough evidence to prove without a shadow of a doubt that this is this is based on hard facts and science. So I really look forward to like that sort of perspective if hopefully you can get elected. And I'm really hopeful too that you serve as an inspiration too to others that have been thinking about running, who again have a background in cryptocurrency, regardless of where they come from in the political spectrum. Like I really, I think like crypto has really, for me, it's brought a more uniting front to my life. Like, I have friends from across the spectrum and I have views across the political spectrum because of, I think, what I've gotten to learn firsthand with, I want to say, like living in incentive design in the land of crypto. Like that's what we do, right? Everything, because there is no law or there's no lawyer you can call up to say, hey, so-and-so didn't pay back my loan. Everything that we do on chain has to be reinforced by, basically impenetrable incentives, or else you have an exploit and you lose your money. So I'm really excited about that. Yeah, Matt, just thanks so much for your time. Like, again, like would love to have you back too at some point, like maybe as you get further along in the campaign. And I want to remind everyone to follow you on Twitter here. They can, of course, learn more about your campaign here at mattwestforcongress.com. There's also, if you wanted to, so again, you're running for a district in Oregon, the 6th district, for the U.S. House seat. So, whether you're in Oregon or not, you're capable of donating to this.
I'd love to have an opportunity to quickly describe the state of my race, if you don't mind, before we jump. Perfect.
Yes, please.
So,
yeah.
I am running in Oregon's 6th district, which is a brand new district, which has no incumbent. So it's an open seat, and there's a lot of people who are running for it. But I'm the only crypto developer who's actually running for this race. It should be noted that one of my primary opponents is a state legislator who voted to ban the state of Oregon from interacting with any blockchain whatsoever, which actually now is state law. I did not know that until I started running. It turns out that if I was a state person running for, say, governor or whatever, accepting donations in cryptocurrency would be illegal. But since I'm running for federal office, I can, and we do have a BitPay website where we can accept crypto donations. I will say that I know the history of our community has very long been like proudly apolitical. We'll just go off in our corner, be those crypto anarchists, build our more perfect future, whatever happens around us. But I think what we've seen this last year reinforces the idea that even if you don't want to engage with politics, politics can find a way of engaging itself upon you. And historically, because we've been apolitical, because we haven't really historically donated or been loud about politics in our spaces, the people, like the traditional career politicians in Washington, have had no reason to listen to us or care about whatever we think, because we're not going to be loud. And if we're not going to donate, we're not going to these the $2 million that it takes to win. Only have a maximum donation of like $5,000 per person. If we can raise that $2 million, I promise you, we will force Washington to listen to us, because now they've seen that we are willing to stand up and fight for what we believe in, and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is. And lastly, we become a brand new source of political donations and financing. Our concerns will very quickly become their concerns. So this is a huge opportunity to get one of our own in Congress, but to force the entire national infrastructure to pay attention to what we've been talking about this last 45 minutes, last hour. This is crucial. I definitely have a path to victory, but I need the support of the community, and I do need your donations. So please go to my website, www.mattwestforcongress.com, and donate. It will make a difference, I promise you.
One more thing, and forgive me, I think you said this, but my feed. I think it broke up on my end actually. So you can donate through ActBlue. You can also donate through BitPay, and
That's correct.
BitPay will allow you to donate through, like when you donate through Oh, I see. Okay, and it does support stable coins as well. Like it looks like there's quite a few cryptocurrencies there. So
Yep.
cool, man. Like, yeah, this is great. Limit of $2,900. So yeah, everyone, that's at mattwestforcongress.com. And yeah, well, congrats again on the campaign. I look forward to staying in touch. I'm really excited about what you're running for. You could not fit more of a profile for, I mean, normally we just talk DeFi here, but like this is really, really important to the future of, I think, DeFi in the United States. And obviously that has influence in other parts of the world. So this is one like huge win that we could have to get one of our own in there. So anyways, congrats on the campaign though, Matt, and hopefully we can celebrate here in the future. But I'm going to just end up ending the broadcast here in just a sec. So just anything else you wanted to share before we go?
No, once again, please go to my website, read more about me, please donate. But honestly, for everyone listening, thank you so much for your time. My campaign is easily reachable. You can always go to my website, email me. I'm on Twitter, on Telegram even. So I'm not hard to find, and I'd love to engage with you. So seriously.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was going to say this. I thought this might be the first and last time I ever get to interview a political candidate, but my hope is that there's many more Matt West out there. So anyways, Matt, thanks for your time. I'll end the broadcast, and everyone, have a great week. We'll see you soon.